Okay, we call this meeting of the JMRL Board Policy Committee to order. And our first order of business is let's see, is there any remote participation today?
No, we don't have any. We know for a fact that Krista and Kathy won't be able to make it.
Okay. And okay, so then our first order of business is policy 4.234, safe child. So the last meeting we had this in sort of a finalized or a highly advanced bullet point format. We David and I kind of took that and turned that into some draft language, which you have in your handout. In the handout, the black is the current. Then you have red bullet points that showed what we discussed last time, basically. You know, we want to try and cover all those bases. And then the red, again in the handouts, which is now on the screen, is the proposed draft or kind of the starting point for discussion today. So I think our main goal for today is review all this and finalize the wordsmithing and ideally get it to perhaps to a point where we can have a first reading in today's board meeting.
Mike, since you and I worked on this, I did sit down with JMRL's Young Adult Coordinator and Children's Services Coordinator and reviewed it with them and had no major issues, a few notes that we can talk about.
Okay. Do you want to just take us through?
Sure.
Sentence by sentence? I mean, it's kind of.
Yeah, would you like me to read this?
I guess, yes, and I guess I'll sort of got my hand out so I can look at both at the same time.
Yeah, so I think that at the last policy committee meeting, we talked about wanting to have something for parents that was very clear format that makes sense. So we added the kind of bullet points in the middle there. We wanted to address parents leaving kids when they're in programs, and I think that's still an open question based on conversations I've had. Some clarification on what adequately supervised means, defining in loco parentis, talking about when or how the library would call an outside agency to come in, whether or not we need some of the procedural information that is included, and then some discussion about different age groups sitting in areas of the library that are reserved for kids or teens. So I think we addressed all those in here, so it's just a matter of whether or not everybody's happy with the language. So the Jefferson Madison Regional Library welcomes and encourages children of all ages to use its facilities and services. While the library strives to provide a safe environment, branches are public facilities open to all, and the library is not able to accept responsibility for the safety and supervision of children. The library does not act in loco parentis, meaning staff do not take on the functions and legal responsibilities of a parent. Parents and caregivers are responsible for the safety, well-being, and supervision of their children when using the library. So that's the definition of in loco parentis that we added.
Yeah, so they would just expanded the first paragraph from the previous version to just give a little more context. And I think some tone is tweaked in one or two spots.
We tried to. It still sounds pretty you're on your own. Children of different ages require different levels of supervision. In order to safely provide the best service, library staff will require parents to follow these guidelines. So it's ages 9 or younger. Parent or caregiver must maintain visual contact and conversational distance while in the library. If a child is attending a library program, parents must remain in the building. So I did have a question from our young adult supervisor who was asking, you know, is this something that the library really is seeking? And I've heard different opinions from different folks because we have had, she said, well, I bring my child to the downtown library and there's a program going on. I might drop them off and then pop over to, you know, the store or the CVS or something and come back. Currently, we're not allowing that. Is that something that we want to consider?
You know, if it's a 6-year-old,
no,
would be part of this definition. I just worry about the extreme cases where there's a problem, you know, something happens with the kid where, you know, how do we get a hold of that parent right away?
I think that points back to the library is not able to accept responsibility for the safety and supervision, but if we tell them you can leave.
who's asking?
I just had a staff member ask, they were saying like, oh yeah, I would have my 9-year-old come to a program and I would go do something else. Like, I wouldn't consider that to be an issue. But saying it out loud, I think that if we've set a line of you have to be 10 in order to be there by yourself, then if the kid is over 10, fine. If they're under 10, then the same rules would apply. Yeah, I don't hear anybody arguing strongly with one.
You know, I'm sure there'll be cases where the parent slips out and you're not gonna go run after them.
Right, we might not know.
Right. But I think as a
As a policy,
and now the liability has gone to the parent when they've slipped out without. Yeah,
I think the language they said is, you know, if it's be contactable, you know, if somebody, I think they're specifically thinking about the central library, drop a kid off for a book club.
Right.
You're on the mall, you're a block or two away, you know, but like here, if a parent dropped a child off and they needed to go to Walgreens, then they're 20 minutes away.
Yeah, and then you get into having to have contact information like at the.
Would you get in touch with them?
Right. And
Yeah.
then do you have somebody getting dropped off who's 6 or 7 and their parents trying to do this? Like, yeah, I think keeping it as is wise.
Okay, that makes sense to me, just bringing it
the
up.
only thing I would change is just in that, I mean, what I think is, what a lot of parents are probably only gonna read this, this box.
Yeah.
So you wanna make it really clear, but I would maybe just add then that first sentence, must maintain visual contact and conversational distance with the child while in the library.
Blue for off the child. That makes sense to me, and I think it's clear because then I'm thinking, well, what about a program? You know, they'll leave with the children's librarian and they're in the library, they don't have that visual contact anymore, but I think that's addressed in the next sentence.
Sure.
We did have this question, Mike, you and we went back and forth about library staff will require parents to follow these guidelines for adequate supervision, whether or not ask was a better tone. I think it is a better tone, but does that take some teeth away from staff having to say to a parent, I'm sorry, you need to make, your child is here, you're over here, you need to be closer. That was in the sentence. In order to safely provide the best service, library staff will require parents to follow these guidelines for adequate supervision. Any thoughts on that? Okay,
Keep require.
Keep require, you could take away will.
Just for efficiency of language. Provide the best service, library staff will require parents, or library staff require parents. Any objection to that? Removing will.
I think it's requires them.
In order to safely provide the best service, library staff requires. And an older child may use the library unsupervised. 12 and older may act as caregiver for younger children.
Really change, I mean, because I think parents are only gonna look at this, most of them. Maybe, because it is so important. But it's a little bit buried below that, that the library, I mean, that these kids have to get picked up at closing. So maybe just add, I don't know how it would go, but a child may use the library unsupervised. But the library will not be responsible for children not picked up at closing time. Do you think that's necessary? It just.
Go into a lot of detail about that
You know,
below here.
And if you just put may use the library unsupervised until closing,
until closing.
would that just sort of at least cue in that direction, maybe?
Mm,
It would still be short, and you can put that in both the 10 and the 12.
Just to alert the parent that.
Yeah.
You can't just leave them and hope they can figure out when closing is or something.
Usually what happens is someone has uncertainty about hours, on the weekends, most of our branches close at 5. So that, people are used to certain hours, maybe it's usually a confusion. And it's not a willful, like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna get a free hour of babysitting. Okay,
This library recently has had some unusual closings due to emergencies.
this branch, yes. Mhm.
How would a parent who has a 12 or older know about that?
Well, let's do the next paragraph and see if this answers the question here. Just like with any user of the library, children must maintain proper behaviors described in policy 4.232, conduct in JMRL, that is the correct format. Staff is authorized to contact appropriate authorities if a situation appears to be dangerous or neglectful to a child, or if a parent, guardian, or caregiver cannot be located or contacted within 30 minutes, or if a child is suspected to be truant. The library will make every effort to locate a parent or guardian if a child is not picked up by library closing time. Staff will remain with an unattended child after closing until a parent, guardian, or the appropriate authorities arrive. So to your point, it doesn't specifically say what happens if the library needs to close early.
We haven't had that many library closings.
No, there haven't been snow closings early for a while, so, yeah.
Doesn't the library post an early closing or?
Yeah, we would put it on the library's website, and put it out on social media and put it on the door of the building, but parents might not see that or know.
I think part of what's behind the age thresholds is that you're sort of, the older they get, the more likely you
More
think.
responsible.
Well, more responsible, they have some capability. Most 10-year-olds now have a phone that they can call their parents. So I think, or if they don't, they're gonna have a more and more likelihood of knowing how to get a hold of their parents and sort of communicate that to the staff. So I think the risk of a snafu like you're describing goes down as the age of the kid goes up.
Well, I know that, it basically staff would treat it as any other closing. They'll make every effort to locate a parent or guardian, they'll remain with an unattended child until a parent or guardian can show up. And if need be, they would call the sheriff's department and say, hey, we can't get in touch with this person. Like when we had to close the building here, there was some concern. The fire department told staff that they needed to close, so we had to evacuate the building. So at that point, we would engage with them to make sure that we could get anybody picked up that was left behind. I think we're covered under staff will remain with an unattended child after closing.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
Question though,
Shoot.
the first line of that, should it be up here above, the whole thing of ages of the children and everything? Because the rest of that paragraph is essentially the caretaking of children. So they have the proper behavior, above the grid. Just like with any user, the library children must maintain proper behavior as described in the policy. Then underneath it, we've got what happens if we don't have the proper, and these are the ages of the kids, and then what happens if we don't have proper behavior.
That's fine with me. I think that first sentence is a little bit tied to the next one right after it. If there's a dangerous or neglectful situation, but I could see them separate. I think the message would get across. So where do you think that best belongs? Right here.
Yeah, within that. I would say at the end of that, first paragraph.
Top.
No. Right here. Where it was adequate supervision, and then just like any user library.
Okay. I mean, there's some formatting stuff there that we need to change because this is leading directly into, there's a colon here.
Yes, I think she said that at the end of the previous paragraph. Is that right?
No,
No, no.
I was where the,
Or where the columns?
oh, I see these guidelines. Not seeing that column.
I mean, that's fine. We just need to come up with a way to say that. Library staff will require parents to follow the following. Follow the listed guidelines, something like that. Or it could just be these guidelines and then change that into a period. Making a note so we can tell the full board what the changes were. Okay, does that still work? Children of different ages require different levels of supervision. In order to safely provide this service, library staff requires parents to follow these guidelines for adequate supervision.
Does that work or?
I feel like it makes it unclear what guidelines we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Lines below for adequate supervision. I don't know.
I think I would.
Well, maybe just leave it where it was.
Is that all right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There is a lot in the last two paragraphs here. There's a lot of information which is important for staff, but it could potentially be procedural. So that I think is the big discussion to be had from us today, whether or not this should remain here or be moved into a separate staff procedure. Okay. In addition, library employees and volunteers who work with children and youth under age 18 should observe the two-person rule, the open door policy. Two-person rule requires an employee shall make every reasonable effort to avoid situations where an employed or employee or volunteer worker is, was that correct? Employed?
It could work either way. But
Employed or volunteer worker is alone with a child or youth in a closed room with no outside visual contact. The open door policy requires any solid panel door be open at all times. An employee or volunteer worker is alone with a child or youth. Under no circumstances will a staff member give a child or youth a ride home or take a child or youth outside the building, except on official library business such as teen volunteer work assignment, or remain in a building alone with an unattended child. Library staff should never make physical contact with any patron without prior consent from their individual or their caretaker, unless that patron is exhibiting behaviors dangerous to themselves or others. Okay, I don't think we want take a child or youth outside the building except on official library business such as teen volunteer work assignment. Is that a thing that we would do?
It's not anything I've ever done, but
I don't think, I mean, I talked to Heather about this too, and the closest we would come is like maybe somebody in the park next to the library or something like that. We wouldn't.
you were like taking them with you to do an outreach thing or something. But I can't, I wouldn't take them in my personal car. I would say like, have your parent
Yeah.
meet me there.
But you do, children do go outside to the park, right?
Yeah, sometimes we will have a program in the park, but it's clearly labeled and designated beforehand. We wouldn't just take somebody's child out of the library without having that conversation. This is more like give a ride to a teen volunteer. I just don't.
Yeah, it seems dicey.
I don't.
Yeah.
Can't envision a scenario in which that would happen, or a library staff member.
I'm just brainstorming. I'm thinking of a bus driver with a bus. So let's say we're gonna do a ride along on the bookmobile today and go to 3 stops, and you've got, I guess the bookmobile doesn't really have seats though.
Well, there's a passenger seat.
Yeah, but it's not a With like a van where you'd have
Yeah, I mean, I
a
would-
tour group type of thing.
Where did that come from?
It was in the previous language. It's in the current policy.
You don't know the origin?
Most policies, at some point, something happened that somebody said we have to write this in there.
I'm gonna take it out then if it's ambiguous.
I think it's ambiguous enough that I probably would not sign off on any scenario where a staff member is giving a ride to a minor, you know, without their parent being there or something like that.
But I think take outside the building is not the same as give a ride. I mean, I agree, but
Under no circumstances will staff member give a child or youth a ride home or take them outside the building except on official library business.
right. So outside the building is different from ride home in that
Clause.
construction, yeah. So that to me, the second clause encompasses walk over to the park because we've got
Official library business.
we've got a program for an outreach. You're staffing the desk at the summer reading program.
Right. Second Street's closed and you're doing summer reading sign up.
I'm just thinking maybe the building part's the problem, like off of library grounds. Maybe encompasses a little more I mean, we have volunteers outside of the building during our summer reading kickoff, technically, but they're like on library, right?
Yeah.
But I think you're trying to avoid, hey, let's go out in the parking lot and discuss the book list, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Or like, we're going to the, whatever, Washington Park for this outreach thing, get in my car and we'll ride together. It's like, no, yeah.
And I guess it doesn't hurt anything to keep it in there. So maybe let's step back. The broader question is do we want all this information? This is useful information from my standpoint. We have used this to advocate for windows and doors of meeting rooms. It's something to point to for staff and training to say, you know, these are rules that you have to abide by in order to keep yourself protected and make sure the kids are protected. But it could be a procedure.
The audience here is the families.
Right.
And the audience for this paragraph is staff. It'd be for the most part.
I think the only
don't think it needs to be.
I think I might agree. The first time we discussed this, I remember Camille saying, you know, you like to hear, as a parent, you like to hear that the library is taking steps to make sure that your kid is protected and is not left alone with anybody.
So would it be simpler to just say that we follow
A
two-person rule or open door policy, period?
Yeah, or you could say as described in JMRL procedures. I don't know if we do that anywhere else, like hint at there's this existence of more details that you could know about if you wanted.
I don't know. Yeah.
I think we've referred to it in different times.
Yeah, but I think that's the question here is it worth it is it important for parental users of the library to just understand that these are promises that we're making about how we're going to conduct things? I mean, I think I tend to feel like it's more too detailed also.
We did get a specific question about where in your policy does it say library staff should not make physical contact from members of the public?
Yeah, we could leave that in too.
And we didn't have a board level policy that says, oh, hey, library staff shouldn't touch people, basically. So, I mean, if it had been a procedure, I think for the average person that's interacting with the organization, they might be frustrated not finding it in policy and procedure. They have to do the extra step of asking.
Yeah.
But if it's a situation where they want to, like something happened and they want to know what the rules are, I don't know if it makes a difference to them.
I think I would leave the first and last sentence and move the rest to procedure. And then open question,
But refer to the policy.
refer to the procedure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
okay.
whatever.
I think if we're going in that direction, I would say, or the open door policy as described in JMRL procedure. And you don't need the number of it because that kind of changes around.
They usually match the policy number.
I would just leave it as described in procedures, as described in JMRL.
But up, the next paragraph up refer to a specific
Policy, not a
Policy,
procedure.
yeah.
Mhm. So is this a,
This one's a policy. This is the one we're working on now. This is the
Yeah.
board level one. The procedure will be just staff.
okay,
So the function of this clause would be just to hint that you could read more details.
but
If you
somehow
got a
we
hold
have
of it,
to
if you-
find out what that.
Yeah, you're gonna have to ask someone for the
Yeah.
procedure, but it's a hint that you could ask someone
Yeah.
for it.
I mean, I would be okay with saying as described in JMRL procedure, 4.234. Because that's what the number is gonna be.
Okay, if you want.
I would do it. It looks official. It looks like you're not trying to hide something.
You don't have that procedure yet, right?
Correct.
Okay, just checking.
But we will very shortly, but I mean.
Like 10
this-
minutes when you copy and paste that paragraph.
No, the timing will be, if we get through this today and the board has a first reading, then it won't be official policy until a vote. So
Okay.
between now and the vote, there will be a procedure. If this is what the full board wants to do.
And just, I know this is not the common terminology, but would it be useful to put JMRL staff procedure? Just to hear again to someone, hey, we're talking about a staff level document now. Otherwise, it's not obvious, quite obvious, like. We as insiders know there's a difference between policy and procedure, but I don't think that would be obvious.
Yeah, my only concern there would just be consistency throughout,
Yeah,
but like,
yeah.
you know, as you mentioned, this might be the first time we've ever
Yeah.
done this, but I'm actually okay with that, you know, like letting the public know that, oh yeah, like there is more we have thought about this, there is
Yeah.
more detail.
Okay, I like it. Everyone's.
That's Alita. It's probably not great. Okay, and then we're gonna leave the never make physical contact just because that's an important thing. To best serve the needs of library users of different ages, the library may identify areas for targeted age groups and ask patrons to cooperate with these age guidelines when the intended audiences are likely to use these areas. So I think we need some work on the wording here.
Yeah, I think I thought that was
Confusing.
confusing. I mean, it's sort of like you don't want to say what. It's like you're trying to.
Cutting to the chase
walking around.
is that different libraries have treated this differently, basically. So you have a teen area or a kids area, and whether or not you want to require that only certain users, certain age groups could be in a certain area. And I think organizationally, we have always fallen on the strongly suggest and request. So I think that's probably the confusion here. It's not coming out and saying you can't do this thing. Because if a patron is sitting in the teen area here, for the most part, it's fine. They're using the resources, they're using the Wi-Fi. If we're then needing it for a teen program, or if the teens are coming in after school, or like here, it gets very busy on Friday afternoons during football season here because the stadium is right behind the building. So the school kids get out and they come in here. We would ask people like, this is the teen area. Do you mind moving over here?
Right.
But if they said, I refuse, this is, you know, my tax dollars have paid for this. We would deal with any conduct violations that happen because of that, but the use of the space is a bit less bound.
You can't say you can't, you have to leave.
Well,
We
I
could,
mean,
we could.
the
So,
board can make that
Yeah, that's the
decision.
question is, do we want to organizationally go with more of a request or say, hey, we have these
You can't do it.
age limited areas here and there.
And how do you make those distinctions about what someone's use of that space is? You know, like we've had issues in the past where people have been told like, oh, you can't use this space because it's for kids, but then if somebody else is using it, the staff is put in a position where they're trying to decide, well, are they using the collection or are they, how is this person interacting with the space? I'd rather they have a blanket, like yes or no.
My question here is that safe child?
to have a person in that space or to?
No,
Well, Paul, she's wondering why is this
belong
even
here at all?
yeah,
It feels like it to me, just thinking about teen spaces and some, you know, incidences of adults making teens uncomfortable and trying to carve out space for them where they don't have to interact with people who they don't know who are older than them. Seems like a good idea, but it's really hard in practice to accomplish that
I think
without
one of
conflict.
the difficulties is our physical spaces are fluid.
Yes.
There's not, only Northside has a separate room for teens, you know, like you go, when, after the meeting today, you'll walk through here and see it's an area that is open and bordering on every other area.
yeah, I wandered into the teen space in Crozet before.
Yeah. Yeah, we do the best we can to define them, you know, some of the material, you can tell like the books that are on the shelves and things and the signage and the posters and things are geared towards. This is a tough one. I think this is a board level discussion here. I know that we have some staff that would, like our young adult librarians would probably love to be able to say like, no, this is teens
Well,
only.
that's what I'm wondering. I mean, that's what I would defer to is what is the staff, what's best for them? In these, I don't have any trouble going up to a adult and saying, just sit over there.
I mean, I think that's effectively what we're doing,
Yeah.
but it's a request, you know, please. You know, we've got teens coming in now. This is the time of day.
Yeah.
Would you mind?
And from a staff perspective, how often is that not, does that approach fail to accomplish what we want it to accomplish?
Not very often.
But would the staff prefer to have a
Sure.
rule?
Yeah, it feels like a very gray area at
Yeah.
the way it is right now. And it is hard, like, it's the consistency is difficult. When you do have to make the judgment call of, is that person browsing? Are they lurking? Are they sitting over there consistently when there are other areas open and only sitting there when there are teens around? Like,
Do they like the light in that corner?
right.
And
And then you have to make sure you're asking every single adult who's
Yeah.
sitting there every time to leave, otherwise then you are.
I just read like 10 articles in the last 2 days about adults and teens, and I wouldn't have any trouble just saying it's a rule. Bug off, get away from these teens, guys.
what if, you know, we have a lot, that young adult collection is one of the most popular collections of materials of books, and the
Yeah.
readers are not just teens.
No, I mean, when there's a program. Well, this is what this rule is about.
It's just for use.
It's just like a safe place.
I think the intent of, and the way I read it now is,
Oh, I
it's
thought
after
this-
school and teens are congregating in this area. So we're asking you to.
Yeah, if there's a program, absolutely, we would
Yeah.
say, we need this space for library programming right now, I'm sorry, you're not part of this
But
program.
that's not, that in itself is not an age, necessarily an age specific thing. I mean, the program may happen to be
This
targeted.
is more everyday use, like there's somebody who comes in now before school lets out and sits in that area, and then school lets out in an hour. You know, what does the staff to do? They would like them to move so that the space is
Yeah.
welcoming and inviting for teens that are coming in, like teens are not gonna wanna be in it and occupy a space that grown-ups are in. But then, you know, I mean, maybe the compromise is to say we can set certain hours, certain times. You know, like there's an after-school window, I think, at most locations.
Yeah, after school window. When school's out for the summer, all day.
Just all summer.
Summer, I don't know. You also have homeschool people coming in during the day, so it's
You've got,
kinda,
like, you've got a lot of people that need access to the collection. I think that's not the problem, the browsing, it's the sitting. It's the
yeah, the
occupancy.
yes,
Yeah.
seating areas. Maybe we should say seating areas.
Well, I think that Ann, you've identified the issue though, is that we don't. You know, in my mind, it was that the board is not gonna want to say, like, this area is not for you, you can't use this. And we're not saying you can't use it, it's sitting in occupying the sitting areas.
There's some of that in it, but something that Camille said is pretty convincing to me, which is now when you establish a hard and fast rule, it's your obligation to enforce that consistently, or else you're asking for trouble. So that seems to be a cost of having the rule, you know, that
Yeah.
you're no longer allowing yourself the flexibility to deal with gray areas when it would be, so it's a false negative and false positive type of
This
situation.
kind of does address the timing. It's when
Yeah.
intended audiences are likely to use these areas. But I agree that the wording doesn't, we're trying to pack a lot into one word there.
I think I might tweak, if you're staying with the current approach, I might tweak that during times when.
Take out the library may identify, because the library identifies it.
What's the replacement?
May
Identifies, yeah.
Just that.
library identifies areas for targeted age groups.
Does it make a difference to you, Anne, that that we're not talking about programming during programming?
Well, I understand better from that it's at any time. The library identifies areas for targeted age groups and asks patrons.
Yeah.
to cooperate. Or respect these age guidelines. I guess cooperate's stronger.
You could say comply with if you want to be
Comply,
even
that would be
stronger.
Yeah.
Or-
I like that. Keyboard. It's like
a cat on your keyboard.
best serve the needs of library users of different ages. The library identifies areas for targeted age groups and asks patients to comply with these age guidelines during times when the intended audiences are likely to use these areas. I mean, I think that's pretty good if we're not going to come right out and say, like, you can't use these.
Or can you just say when the intended audiences use these areas?
I think we wanted to leave open a window for the after school, like we might have somebody say, there's no kids here. So my staff might go up to somebody knowing that it's 3 o'clock and the kids are getting out of school and say, I'm sorry, would you mind sitting over here because we're expecting some kids? And they'll say, well, there's no kids here and your policy says when there's kids here.
Okay.
I mean, that's like
Right.
the pickiest of
It's a little
nits.
more.
They're probably not gonna pull out the policy and say, actually,
Probably do.
One might.
somebody. So Camille, if you had, Camille, you all will see Camille's beautiful new young adult space when we go to Gordon Avenue later this year. But if you had somebody sitting in there and you knew that kids were coming out of school or there was something going on, do you feel like does this change how you would interact with those people? Does this give you and your staff enough teeth to go up and say like, oh, hi, would you mind moving over here?
Yeah, I think it does. We've not currently actively been, clearing the area. We put the table back in there and it has a sign on it that says like, this is intended for teens.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say like, we will boot you out immediately if you're not one. So yeah, no, I think this works to give justification for what needs to be done to keep the areas comfortable for teens.
I feel like we might be having this conversation again with the full board when they identify that this was something that we thought about and talked about. And I don't think it was addressed in the current policy. So this is an addition, this is a new concept. So before the staff had no teeth and nothing, they would just use our conduct policy, which would mean that somebody would have to be disrupting library services. So now at least they can feel like, well, this says I can go ask them to move. And then most of the time, 99 times out of 100, the person say, oh, sure. And the one time that they don't, it will give them some teeth to say, well, actually, we really need this. And then if things go left, then that's just public service. Okay, and then the last sentence was, in order for library staff and volunteers to be easily identified, designated JMRL badges must be worn at all times when representing the library. We could move that to the procedure as well.
Yeah.
Does that matter to the public?
I mean, I think they assume that we're doing that.
Yeah, we require it of our staff.
And we could add more detail, obviously, in the procedure about asking people to move from areas and consistency and all that kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
Sure.
Excellent. Camille knows I've been threatening, I'm scared to say this in front of Mike, but I've been threatening to do a whole procedure project, like we did with the working group for the staff handbook, because so many of them are out of date, or so many policies don't have procedures, just to get some consistency there.
Well, then you'll have to then review, after that, review the handbook again to make sure.
Make sure that everything
Okay, are we happy with this to recommend to the full board?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so it's just, is it too messy now? Maybe not.
we can present it as is to the full board and then say, if you'd like, we can represent it for the first reading. I don't think there's a rush on this.
Okay. All right, so we can move on. We got about 20 minutes to try and keep the ball moving on partnerships.
So just to refresh everybody's memory, because it was a really long time between now and our last policy committee meeting. The current policy is very short here. It's 3 sentences. JMRL supports library partnerships with other community orgs. Such cooperation allows an exchange of services, products, or monetary donations, and may assist each organization in achieving mutual and compatible goals. Coordination of community requests is essential to maintaining these selective relationships and avoiding duplication of requests. So at your last meeting, we had some conversation about, well, what should this look like and what would we want it to look like? And then we had reached out to peer libraries across the state to see if anybody else currently had a partnership policy, and we didn't get responses. We asked at the same time as the Safe Child. Folks generally had something either in conduct or in a separate Safe Child policy, but partnership we didn't see a lot of. So I think we also talked about, do we need this policy? Just to, generally, I think this policy committee over the last few years has done a good job of coming with that lens to everything, though. So it's not picking on this one, it's just, do we want this?
My kind of perspective that I'm coming to this with, if we're going to use the phrase, you're our partner, and put that in our messaging, which we do currently, then there needs to be some definition of what that is, because where I've been coming from is that implies some level of endorsement. So now that third party can go, hey, I'm the library's partner, and they're borrowing our branding and our reputation, which might be is fine in many cases, but I want to have some thoughtful definitions in place of what does that really imply. And then the second part of that is, hey, I'm reading all this messaging. There's all these great partners out there. No one asked me to be a partner. I never saw an opportunity to become a partner. Again, it's this endorsement, or they're the buddies or the insiders. Why didn't I get that chance? So I'd like some.
I think we also diverged on that and talked about mission and values.
Yeah. Say a few more words about what.
That we want to make certain that the partnerships that we have,
Right.
hey, I want to be one, is supporting of the mission and values.
Yeah.
And, do we put that into any kind of statements if we have
Right.
a statement about that?
Yeah, I think that would be I don't think we're diverging if you meant we had a different opinion. That would be part of the definition of what's the purpose of having a partner. It's to support mission values.
I think we've had to be more selective about that in the last few years. The example I use about the kind of potential mission creep is the COVID test distribution that we did in the Omicron wave of the coronavirus, when you couldn't get an at-home test anywhere and the library had them, the Department of Health provided them, and the libraries across the state were giving them out, and it swamped our capacity for anything else for a few weeks. It was the only thing that the library could do. So while you could make an argument that it was dovetailing with our mission, it overwhelmed it and there was no library service happening. So we want to, I think, to your point, Martha, be careful that we do always look to our mission and values when we're partnering, whatever the scenario is. We want to make sure that it's working both ways. Like we're helping a partner out, but they're also helping us to meet our mission. Just, there's a chance for some mission creep there because people
Yeah.
see the library as a trusted institution that has a system for delivering information and materials, and that could be very useful for a lot of folks. I'm glad we did that. It was, an important thing to do.
Yeah,
But
I think that was kind of a special case, and I think there's times when our jurisdictions say, hey, we've got these facilities
Yeah.
and they could be used for X. I mean, I think sometimes the library can come across as a de facto day shelter in some instances. And I've seen that, we watched that whole film a couple years back where it was about a bigger city library. I know only David remembers, or probably Camille.
Anyway.
I think, no, it was like Cleveland or something.
Yeah.
But
I'm
locally,
diverging.
the city of Charlottesville announces a cooling center or a heating center, then they always include the library.
Right, because we are,
Their facilities which are open and provide those services.
Yeah.
And Ophelia has a great partnership here where there's a blood drive that they do, semi-regularly here. So I'm not saying that like we want to cut those partnerships out, but we just want to have some language in here about our mission.
yeah, I certainly agree.
I sort of have trouble with this whole thing. I mean, partnerships, just because it's a legal term, causes me problems. But aren't we really just talking about that we have relationships with community organizations? And just make it a little more flexible,
Say that last part again, like communication.
that we have relationships with community. I mean, as opposed to partnerships. It's such a, distinct relation. I mean, it's a legal relationship, really, if somebody wanted to make a big fuss about it. I mean, don't we want to be a little fluid with this? Just as long as these relationships reflect the mission of the library or the community as a whole, or, the well-being of the community or something.
I think maybe in library land partnership gets used a lot more in a different way than the way that you're hearing it, but I mean, that's a good point because other people reading this aren't from library.
It is, and I think you're kind of getting in where I'm coming from, which is we're in our outbound messaging to skeptical users with, skeptical and observers without context. We frequently use this word partnership. So if you're speaking to, well, we just shouldn't use that word, that would be one approach. But another approach is if we're going to use that word, which seems common with us and probably other libraries, I would suggest it's probably common. Then my thought would be, let's give some context backing that up as when we say partnership, what do we mean by it?
Yeah, I think it's probably trying to think about messaging from local governments as well, like when they just talk about working together on something, so that it might be more of a relationship, but the word is used pretty frequently, like we're gonna partner with the Red Cross, we're gonna partner with the health district, we're gonna partner with school, I mean, we use it a lot just to mean that there's an outside body involved in
Collaborating.
Collaboration, yeah, and I think that's something we brought up last time, collaboration versus partnership. Probably, and that was like the thread that you're pulling on now.
But I also feel like I've seen, and maybe I'm wrong, or it's an impression, I've seen it used as a title, like here's our partner for this.
Yeah,
We're not just partnering, you're our partner, this organization is our partner for
I
this.
think
for
about
this
like
purpose.
the festival of the book, like that's the big one, like it's founded and support from the Friends of the Library. It's just been a very closely knit thing over many decades now, where they'll put in their branding, partner,
Right.
and we'll put in our branding, we're partnering on same page. Because there's an exchange of resources there too, to the original point of the, something about money was up here, right? Services, products, or monetary donations. We're not exchanging money, but we're paying for part of that program, they're paying for part of it.
Or you have an organization that brings in speakers and they're essentially contributing their time to your program without you having to
Yeah.
compensate them for it from the library budget.
And I think that was the first bullet point, program partnerships and other partnerships are very
Right.
different things, and if we need to use different language about program partnerships, we have a program partners forum out on our website now. And you want to come and do a program at the library, you think people might be interested in the book that you wrote or whatever it is that you have to offer. Language that we currently use is you're asking to be a partner with the library.
I think that could use some clarification too, because it goes into the form, but then what are the criteria for accepting that person or organization?
Or you should ask. So from the program policy, it says the library may participate in cooperative or joint programs with other organizations, institutions, or individuals in order to make use of outside skills or expertise. Individuals or organizations may request consideration to partner with library staff to present a program by completing this form called the program partnership request. Alternately, groups may use the meeting room for their own purposes as described in the library's meeting and conference room policy. So what you're describing is maybe some procedure around
That's what I
that.
was just thinking, that procedure question.
But it would dovetail off of that, like, does this
Yeah.
meet our mission and values, and is there an interest in it too? Because if you're gonna ask to take staff time to help put something together, we want people to
Yeah.
come.
Yeah, we also had somebody recently submit that form, but then say that they had a fee for their thing, like, this isn't a partnership, this is you asking the library to hire you. There needs to be more, yeah. Once
But
we get
there
a
is an
clear
avenue
definition
for-
here,
there
that we
needs-
can draw on for
There
the,
needs to be an avenue for that too. I mean, we do pay performers
Yeah,
to come and do.
and I don't think we have a obvious.
Ask for that, yeah.
Yeah.
Just from what I'm reading here with the program policy, I'm envisioning a sentence somewhere in partnerships that say, if you want to partner on a program, we'll reference back over to the other policy.
So it sounds like we're in agreement that there should be a partnership policy.
So you're making a distinction between program partners
Yeah.
versus.
I just want to know if I see somebody say, I'm a library partner, what does that mean? I want to be able to, but yes.
There might be different levels of.
Correct, agreed, yeah. And I think that is starting to make sense in my mind also, that we have some,
But what
maybe we're
would you
defining
say by
levels.
Program partners versus
Yeah,
Library partner.
that's the question, but what is that?
the institutional.
We kind of have partnerships, like in Nelson County, we have an MOU with the school system for a certain, like, we're gonna do this for them and they're gonna do this, and then it's all about, getting kids engaged with reading in the library. But it's not necessarily specific programs. Some of it involves like teacher visits to the library or librarian visits to the schools and things
So
like that.
program versus library-wide partnerships.
So could you add a couple of bullet points, David? So after the first one, maybe a sub-indent, different levels of partnership, different defined types or levels of partnership. Question. And then somewhere. Like near the top, invoke mission and values.
I think if we invoked our mission and values, say that we, some of this language that's already in here about why we would partner. Invoke the mission and values, say we want our partnerships to match, to meet these mission and values. State, here are the types, here's how you do a program partnership, and then some information about any other sort of partnership. And I think that's like a pretty good
Outline.
framework. Is that gonna be clear in 6 weeks when we go back to look at this?
We've got the video. We can
Go to the tape.
go to the tape.
Invoke mission and values, distinction between programming.
And we would do it to enhance our mission or to, yeah.
I think that gives enough that we could come up with a draft maybe for the next meeting.
So if anyone wants to work with David on that, volunteer with him the next couple weeks. Otherwise, something will probably magically appear between now and the next meeting.
So I would take out, do we need this policy? Because we've decided.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah. That's concrete progress.
And I would take out, forget, I mean, that's my thing. Take out that legal implications, I think. We've worked through that.
Okay. Is that something we need to consider?
I don't think so. I think
We're just describing what we mean by
Yeah.
partnership, and we're
So-
addressing. I do maybe put the word collaborate somewhere in these bullets, because I think that was a useful word. Okay. Are we happy with this as a sort of an outline, not a draft? Great. Okay, I think that's all the agenda items. Yes, and
Time is about up.
so do we have anything else to think about or mention today?
And then we just keep going through other policies.
Yeah, we got, so,
What's that?
I'll say a few words.
Next.
So David's got a list, so we have a,
Coming to a policy.
There's a-
Hear you.
you see at the bottom of each policy, there's a last reviewed date. And currently our meta policy is that we review every policy every 10 years. Now, we have talked as a side note about a reorg of the policy manual, and one of the things we've talked about there is that some policies, like a website or an internet policy, might use a different
Yeah.
frequency than the 10 years. But right now, it's 10 years. So David's got a list of will be reaching its 10-year anniversary here in 2024.
And we're finishing 2023. We're behind. I think Safe Child was 2023 and Partnership. Both of those were last year, so. And these are some important ones.
Yeah, material selection is
Just actually a
definitely,
huge one, yeah, and emergency closings too, like that comes up.
okay. The baby bookmobile and displays are not as much.
Yeah, I think the bookmobile one has a lot of procedural information in it. Once you take a look at it, you'll see.
Material selection is kind of in some ways the most important. It's kind of the core of everything. At the same time, I think it's pretty well refined and has gotten a lot of thought over the years. I don't think there's like controversial new stuff or new concepts that we're.
I don't think it's started over.
Right. I did have a thought, David, with materials selection, that could be a CE. Although, did we do one in the
Yeah,
last?
we did.
We did a reconsiderations one, I think, and we've done some data, some analysis.
Right.
Data
Yeah.
analysis,
We've
so.
done some things in that topic for
Yeah.
sure, but have we really just had our collections person say, well, here's how we make the decision. I mean, this committee is going to need to understand that, have a real good feel for that as part of our review, and then the full board is going to need to have that. I guess the question is that something that has been kind of covered?
I can look back and see, Meredith is always ready to come and give a CE, but she's given so many. I'm not sure if that's been.
It might be, I had a thought, and the reason not to do it is, we just did that. But if we kind of didn't do it from that standpoint, you might time that as a CE kind of right before this committee starts, and then it'll still be fresh.
Yeah, let me look back and see whether or not that one's been covered.
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah,
That's a good point. There are some where it's useful to hear.
yeah, and also that's one of these that's, I think, is kind of a keen public interest. It's in our interest for the public to really understand that very clearly as well. Okay, so that's a possible add-on to. Okay, we will then adjourn. Thank you, everyone.